Hello everyone, it's Daz, and I want to talk to you about the Monarch Legacy of Monsters show as well as the Godzilla and King Kong series. I went back and I rewatched Kong Skull Island, all of the newer Godzilla films, just to get a picture again of the Monsterverse as well as I've been watching episodes of the new show. And there are spoiler alerts if you haven't seen any of the films or the show. Pretty much, it introduces Monarch as this secret government organization that's been tracking or keeping track of ancient, huge terrestrial beings, titans as they call them. It comes from Japanese folklore of the kaiju, and Godzilla is the main kaiju of the Godzilla movies, and then King Kong and the King Kong movies. Then there's a crossover in the most recent film in 2021 of Godzilla versus Kong, and then there's a new one coming up next year. And the show kind of sets up that premise. So we see in the 2014 film that a young soldier who lost his mother as a child because of a accident at the plant, and that area where this disaster happened was closed off, but his father never let it go. His father tries again to go investigate, realizes there's no real radiation threat, and this time instead of being arrested, he's taken to this area where they're keeping what they call muto. It's a massive unidentified terrestrial organism, and it escapes and it begins wreaking havoc, which summons Godzilla from the waters to combat it in Honolulu. But then Muto's mate comes alive in the Nevada desert right outside of Vegas, creates havoc, and Godzilla has to take on two of these beings. Between the US military and Monarch are trying to find a way to aid Godzilla at San Francisco Bay, where they land to combat these creatures. And of course Godzilla is triumphant, and that is what is known as G-Day in the show when they reference it. It was when Godzilla appeared at San Francisco Golden Gate and they fought in the Bay Area. If you go in chronological order of when the films were made, there's Kong Skull Island. So you have at the end of the Vietnam War, there's Bill Randa, who is asking for funding, and he asks if he can go to Skull Island because they discovered it. The president's like, no, but then they decide to offer them funding when they say that possibly a foreign power that they're kind of in a Cold War with could find it first. And they enlist a escort of soldiers who are supposed to return from the Vietnam War but are now roped into this. They're not aware of what they're really doing. And they're a team of scientists as well enlisted to study the seismic activity, but they have to unleash a bunch of seismic charges, basically bombs, on this island to kill any potential creatures that may be there. So there's a geomagnetic storm when they fly into the island, and quickly they are met by the wrath of Kong because they're bombing his island. So naturally he's mad and he throws their helicopters around like little toys. They are immediately seeing Kong as the enemy. Packard, who is the leader of his platoon, is not happy with Kong, and he becomes his enemy. And he uses the guise of trying to find one of the soldiers that was separated from the group, when really he just wants to get revenge on Kong, and he kind of has this chip on his shoulder about losing the Vietnam War. Over time, they find a soldier who had actually been stuck there for 28 years. He was in World War II. Him and a Japanese soldier were fighting when they were interrupted by Kong, and they never were able to get off the island. And he informs him that Kong is not the enemy, but he's actually a titan who protects the island and the native people of the island. That Kong was upset because they were awakening these lizard-like beings that live within Hollow Earth. And Hollow Earth is a central theme in this storyline. Hollow Earth is where these titans essentially come from, and there's a portal to Hollow Earth on Skull Island. Eventually, they team up with Kong and they're able to get off the island, and he destroys their lizard threat. And in Godzilla King of Monsters in 2019, we now see a different set of characters. Godzilla is now threatened by a new enemy, and that is Ghidorah. Ghidorah is actually not a kaiju titan of the earth. He's a alien titan, but he had been housed within Antarctica, and there's Rodon in Mexico that he awakens, and pretty much he has the power to get the other titans to side with him. But Godzilla's counterpart, Mothra, who's kind of like the queen of monsters, she was being kept in this area in China, and she's the only one who doesn't succumb to Ghidorah's sort of spell he has on the other titans. And it's up to Godzilla to take on these titans, and they actually have to venture down by an area in the Pacific, like near Marianas Trench, because that's another way to get to Hollow Earth, which is interesting because a lot of films play with this ideal of Hollow Earth and Marianas Trench. And they're able to recharge Godzilla, so he's able to take on Ghidorah, and with the help of Mothra, he again proves himself as the king of all kaiju. The last film that was made by Hollywood was Godzilla vs. Kong, and in this film, Godzilla seemingly has turned against humankind, attacking them. But unbeknownst to them, there's this company known as Apex who's secretly building a Mechagodzilla, which comes from the Japanese Godzilla canon. Mechagodzilla is this counterfeit Godzilla who's like a machine. He senses that, and they think that Godzilla's gone rogue, so they're trying to get to Hollow Earth to find a way to stop him, and they need the help of Kong, so they kidnap him from Skull Island. And there's a girl who was the last survivor of the indigenous people of that island, and Kong is able to communicate through sign language, and he goes to Hollow Earth and loves it there. Does find a scepter that was pretty much made for him in Throne that he's able to use, and him and Godzilla do fight each other, but they soon realize when Mechagodzilla goes rogue, because the daughter of the Apex CEO, she was there really just trying to gather data so she could take that power from Hollow Earth and give it to her dad to make Mechagodzilla more powerful to defeat Godzilla. So Kong and Godzilla go at it. They realize after Mechagodzilla shows up that maybe instead of fighting each other, they should be fighting this being, and they are able to defeat it, and they go their separate ways. And that's what we're left with until 2024. Recently, there was Godzilla Minus One in theaters. That's a Japanese film. And the last film before that was Godzilla Shin, or Shin Godzilla, which went over the origins of Godzilla. And Godzilla is closely tied to this idea of the dangers of nuclear war. He was said to have been created by the radiation from the bombs in the Pacific, which was a real thing. Whenever they were testing the atomic bomb, they tested it in New Mexico, which we saw in Oppenheimer, as well as on the Bikini Island Atoll, and they dropped it on Japan, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima. So Godzilla is sort of this monster who's made from war and greed. I've talked about Godzilla in the past. It's been probably almost 10 years ago now, because I talked about him whenever that first Godzilla film came out in 2014 that I went over, and I had likened him to the Leviathan. I still think of him kind of like a Leviathan-like figure. I think that is very similar if you read about Leviathan in Job. The ancients did talk about a place known as Agartha, which some people believe is where the quote-unquote lost continents, there's plenty you can read on. And there's a lot of creation myths around the world who say that creation started within the earth. The idea behind the hollow earth is that the core is used as a sun, and there's life, and everything inside of it is a lot more massive. I've always found hollow earth to be a fascinating theory, but it is fascinating how they played with the idea. And I just had this funny thought. I've been seeing a lot of videos about Australia, and if anyone's listening from Australia, I'm sure you can confirm this, but people always joke about the large insects and animals there. We do know in Genesis 6, when it talks about the days of Noah and when the Watchers came down to earth and made with human women, and they also mixed their DNA with a lot of other beings. It talks about it in the book of Jasher and Jubilees briefly, as well as the Book of Giants and the Apocrypha, which were removed books from the 66. They did have these sort of titan-like beings around the world. There's lots of legends of giants. There's been weird skulls found around the world that are massive, and some say the Smithsonian Society has worked to bury that. There's clippings in American history of giants, even stories by indigenous people of certain giants living in caves or the western parts of the US. To me, anything's possible. I've been to every national park west of Kansas City, except for the Wind Caves, and I just want to say that when people talk about national parks, people going missing, and anything could live out there, anything really could. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of square miles of land that just goes on and on and on, so anything could be there. I mean, the options are endless. This world is a lot bigger than we know it, and I love exploration. If there was ever a opportunity to explore new territory, I'd be the first one to sign up because I'm always looking for data. Kong Skull Island definitely does play with this idea. Of course, it's all said to be fiction, but I would not be surprised if there aren't parts of our government that exist like Monarch. It's also funny that they're called Monarch, like MK Ultra. I'd like to know what your thoughts are. There's definitely been stories that make you think, are they trying to tell us something in film? I remember a few years back doing videos about pterodactyl sightings, and if you look at my historical paranormal series on my second channel, you'll see that there are a lot of interesting stories. A lot of them are based in the United States of strange sightings that kind of lend credence to the idea of some kind of titans or kaijus that could be out there in our world. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. Take care and God bless.